Yes, indeed. We are back aboard with another edition of the Last Word on Sports Media podcast. Hey, it's now the month of March. We love it because that means the NCAA tournament. It means spring is in the air for Major League Baseball and much more. I am merely the somewhat capable co-host, TJ Reeves. My co-host is Mike Gill of the Mike Gill Show in Atlantic City on the ESPN radio station there, 97.3 ESPN. The afternoon show, the Sports Bash. Good to be back with you. We've got some topics to go over. How are things as we get rolling into a brand new month?
Things are good. We got a lot going on, and I saw one of the things we're going to discuss today. I got a good chance to look at it last night, or listen to it, I guess I should say. Mike Tirico doing the local Sixer game last night here in the Philadelphia market. I know that's something we're going to touch on today. Why was Mike Tirico calling a lousy Sixer Portland game? We got the details on that, plus Jimmy Johnson springing some news. So some interesting topics today, plus more on the MLB, ESPN divorce, if you will. So looking forward to it.
Lots of it. Again, thank you for finding us. We're on social media, by the way, on Mike's YouTube channel, Mike Gill Show YouTube channel. Also on Twitter as well, Twitter X. Find him at Mike Gill Show. Find me at Buck Sideline Guy, BUC, Buck Sideline Guy. If you're only hearing us in podcast, come see what we look like. The show is also a podcast, so if you're watching us, go sign up, follow, subscribe on Apple, Spreaker, Spotify to the Last Word on Sports Media podcast. Why don't we begin with the big news? And I can't say it was that big of a surprise, Mike Gill, that the news came out on Monday that Jimmy Johnson, the former Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl winning coach, the former Miami Hurricane national championship football coach before that, is hanging it up as a studio analyst with Fox Sports after this 2025 season at 81 years of age. Johnson hinted at this. They hinted at this in the Super Bowl win by the Eagles over the Chiefs in New Orleans. The sign-off was almost like a goodbye, like you're going to retire. So we can't say here in the first week of March that we're that surprised, are we, on that subject?
No, it was weird. It felt like they were going to have him announce his retirement live, and then he kind of got cold feet about it. Like, in the moment, it felt like didn't it feel like that night that was supposed to be him kind of saying, thank you, 31 years, been great. And they ran this whole, it was a very awkward situation, but here they are now making the announcement. 31 years. I can't believe he's, what'd you say, 81 years old? That blows me away.
Years old, and he's been doing this since the inception of the NFL on Fox back in 1994. But a lot of people don't remember he then became the coach of the Dolphins a couple of years into the broadcasting role with Terry Bradshaw and Howie Long. And he left that show for 6 years, 4 years as the Dolphins coach. And then when he was done with the Dolphins after the 99 season, Dan Marino's final year, by the way, Dan Marino's final game, Jimmy Johnson's final game in the NFL, are you ready for this, Mike Gill, is a 61-7 loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the playoffs. So then he took 2 years off and then came back to the show on Fox NFL Sunday in 2002. And he's been there ever since now for the last 23 seasons. And again, he's older. Remember during the COVID year, Mike Gill, he was doing the show remotely in 2020. He never came to the studio, was doing the show via video from his home in Key West, Florida. Which is not easy, by the way, to get in and out of, to go and travel and go to LA. I'm not crying crocodile tears here for his travel, but I can understand once you're in your late 70s or you're 80 or 81 years old and you've done it for so long and you have your money, Mike, I can understand where, you want to live out the rest of your life doing what you want to do and you don't have to be in an NFL studio every fall. What do you make of that?
Yeah, listen, and Jimmy Johnson, he is funny because I remember him with the Dallas team. So the Miami teams are a little bit before me. I mean, I kind of remember him at Miami, but Dallas is where he kind of made his name. And as you mentioned, he had that Dolphins thing that didn't go all that well. But there's a whole generation that knows him as the guy as part of that Fox team. And now that Fox team, for really the first time, is losing a key piece. I mean, now it's going to be the first time. It has been Howie, it has been Jimmy, and it has been Terry. I know they brought Strahan in. Gronk has been in there. But this will be the first year now. We'll see if they replace Jimmy with somebody else, that they just stick with what they have. I think that'll be the interesting part, that this will be the first big loss for that Fox broadcasting team.
And it's a good point you make that they've been grooming Strahan and Gronk sitting there. I mean, at times they've literally had 5 analysts on the desk, only being rivaled by like CNN's political night coverage when they have election night coverage and they have 15 people on the set. So they've been grooming Strahan and Gronk to talk more, obviously, and be who that is. And at some point, Terry Bradshaw's had health problems. He's almost 80 years old, believe it or not. Terry Bradshaw's not played in an NFL game in going on right at 40 years since the early 1980s, right? A little over 40 years. So again, he's pushing 80 years of age with health problems. It's not going to last forever on that broadcast of Fox NFL Sunday. So it is going to be interesting on what they're going to do moving forward. But yeah, the tributes, that tight-knit bunch, who can forget the images at halftime of that playoff game back in early 2020 when they came to Jimmy Johnson and surprised him first in the studio, the Pro Football Hall of Fame, live on the air, that he had gotten into the Hall of Fame. That's one of the biggest moments ever, obviously, for that show and for him to have that moment on live TV back then. Mike, any final thought on this?
Listen, Jimmy Johnson, Cowboys coach. I'm in Eagles country, so that always rubs you the wrong way. But he does come to Atlantic City every year and does his fishing tournament. He has a huge fishing tournament that he does here in Atlantic City. He's come on the radio with us here, so he's very open and has been a very, very big part of the media landscape for, my gosh, I mean, you talked about it, going back to the beginning of Fox. You're talking about over 30 years in that role.
And by the way, he did sneak on a season of Survivor on CBS. My twin, almost 17-year-olds religiously watch that show, and they have no idea who Jimmy Johnson is, by the way. But suddenly I had to explain to them, that's the former Super Bowl coach of the Dallas Cowboys sitting there half naked in the Survivor wilderness back on one of the episodes, one of the seasons. He went through the whole audition process, and they put him on the show on Survivor that one year. So happy retirement to Jimmy Johnson on that front, and we'll see what Fox does here in the offseason. All right, you teased me with the Mike Tirico stuff, and I'm going right there with I was not aware of this. Again, I don't keep up as much with the NBA until it gets to the postseason. I've obviously kept up with the rights deals and the announcer moves, but I saw you and a couple of others putting out there that Mike Tirico, the famed ESPN former broadcaster and now NBC #1 guy on all of their sports, that he was actually going to be doing some regional broadcasts of the NBA. And as you mentioned, he did one on Monday night. So how did he do? First NBA game I think I read that he had done since like 2016. He hasn't done an NBA broadcast in a long time. He's had play-by-play of other sports. And what's the motivation behind this with Tirico doing these games kind of on random nights in February, in March of a season before he's going to do the games? What's going on with that? Just some reps, some audition?
Well, I think
what do you think?
I think he's just getting some reps in and I think it's a little bit of promoting the NBA coming to NBC. I mean, he did the game along with Ala Abdel-Nabi, who was the Sixers' regular color analyst. So it was the whole Sixers crew. Kate Scott, who is the normal play-by-player, she went to the studio and was a part of the pregame show last night. But Tirico called the game. And, it was great. I mean, hearing Mike Tirico call the game, he didn't skip a beat. I mean, he's doing the game tomorrow night. We're filming on a Tuesday. He's doing tomorrow night's game, Portland and the Celtics in Boston. So he'll do the play-by-play there and work with Brian Scalabrine, their color analyst. But I think it's just them getting the message out there that the NBA is coming to NBC and Mike Tirico will be the voice that you hear. I don't know if they have any more planned. The PR thing did not say anything else about it, but did get to hear Sixers players. Here's the problem. You put Mike Tirico on a game, it opens up for criticism to your broadcast. And that was what happened last night. The Sixers are not very good. It's been a terrible season. And then Mike Tirico's calling the game, and people were like, this is great. This is great. Mike Tirico, what's he doing?
But what about Kate Scott? What about Kate Scott being pushed aside, who you had previously on the Announcer Schedules podcast? What about that? I mean, it's the optics of that don't look great.
Well, I mean, I think
they
I think they were just like saying, hey, we want to get him into a couple games just to get him some reps and promote the NBA on NBC. Just happened to be these two particular games.
Allegedly, he's going to be working with Reggie Miller. They haven't officially announced the teams, but that's the belief. Noah Eagle and Dwayne Wade will be the second team. It would have made more sense if Reggie Miller was doing it with him, but obviously Miller's got a contract with Turner. Yeah. So that would have made more sense besides just having Tirico, I guess, for the promo. Have him on the NBC.
I think it was more
regional things and having promo NBC.
Yeah, they had Chris Collingsworth call in at one point last night. I think they're just doing a lot of cross-promoting of everything, NBC. Right. We have Sunday Night Football. We've got golf. We've got the Olympics. And we're going to have the NBA. So I think this is just an opportunity for them to try to let people know that the NBA is coming to NBC, to these regional NBC sports networks. There's not a lot of them. A lot of, there's only a handful of NBC sports regional networks. But I guess while they have those regional networks, they're going to try to utilize them. So they did it last night in Philly. They're doing it tomorrow night in Boston. And you got a chance to hear Mike Tirico call NBA for the first time. The last game he called, LeBron was playing for the Cavaliers. He called that game, LeBron and the Cavs, 2016.
How about that? It's been a bit for that. And again, the announcer pairings will come out at a later date as well for everything with Amazon Prime taking over as an NBA broadcaster and the announcers that they're going to be using and the teams that they're going to be using. So all of that in effect for next year. And then we really have to get used to it's the same show, but the Inside the NBA show will be a Sunday show on ABC until the playoffs, and then it might move around some to ESPN and ABC. So we got to get used to all of that, but all of that is for next year for the NBA coverage. Speaking of new, this was new this weekend in my part of the world. You're talking about Tirico doing a Sixers game. So I'm in West Central Florida in Tampa Bay, and the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg, the IndyCar race, was this weekend. It's the first ever IndyCar race that Fox Sports has now broadcasted in their new multi-year deal. Fox is the new home of the Indy Racing League after numerous years with NBC, by the way, with Mike Tirico on the hosting coverage of the Indianapolis 500, not on the race call. So now it's on Fox. They debuted this weekend. They had a good audience of about 1.5 million people to watch IndyCar. Again, it's not as big as NASCAR. It's not as sexy and popular worldwide like Formula One, but they're building to the Indianapolis 500 eventually, Mike Gill. So the debut race, the one critique I have is they, once again, Fox has done this several times. They have a British play-by-play guy on the call in Will Buxton. It's not an American. It's not somebody that's obviously born and bred on IndyCar racing. So they have him calling the races. Again, NBC was using Lee Diffie, a New Zealander, to call the races of IndyCar. I think Americans are they're more familiar with like when Paul Page was calling the Indianapolis 500 back in the day, or some of the other announcers that would do this at Indianapolis. Jim McKay called it forever on Wide World of Sports for the Indianapolis 500. And it was always fascinating that the Indy 500, Mike Gill, was never shown live. It was always on tape delay on purpose because the organizers didn't want people at home watching on TV in Indiana instead of coming to the race. So Jim McKay, for many years, called the race at 11:30 at night, tape delay on ABC back in the 70s and the 80s. So anyway, IndyCar, not as big as NASCAR. I get it. Not as big as Formula One. It's not a prominent sport, but it is interesting that Fox is going to try to pump the audience, the cross promotion, the interest, building to the Indy 500. Do you have any other thought on IndyCar debuting on the new network?
I've never seen an IndyCar race. I mean, I'm familiar with it. It's not my bag.
Right.
It's not I do know Lee Diffie. We talked about him a lot with Phil on the Announcer Schedules podcast. We've had some NASCAR play-by-players that we had on that podcast as well. But certainly, as you said, not NBA, not your thing until for IndyCar, certainly not my thing at all.
Right.
But I didn't even know Fox had the IndyCar.
Most people can't name any of the IndyCar drivers anymore. The Andrettis aren't there. AJ Foyt long ago, all these famous names, Rick Mears, all those guys are long gone from this sport. But the Indy 500 is different. The Kentucky Derby is different. The Masters Golf Tournament is different. People will tune in for that. So it's now on Fox. And by the way, it led into the NASCAR race, which once again scored about a little over 4.5 million, right at 4.5 million people watch the third NASCAR broadcast of the year on Fox. So they've got a toehold a little bit on the racing aspect. Again, it's the Last Word on Sports Media podcast. TJ Reeves, Mike Gill with you here, chopping up some of the different topics. Let's talk about ESPN and the divorce with Major League Baseball. We're finding details about this as the baseball season is ramping up. Reportedly, ESPN wanted a massive discount on their rights fee. That's not a surprise, but the number that's now being floated out is that ESPN was saying to Major League Baseball, instead of $450 million a year, we want to reduce to somewhere around $200 million a year because you've so devalued our deal and what we have. Mike, what's your reaction? Is it no surprise then that Major League Baseball says, I think we can do better than that and we'll find another Sunday night partner? What do you make of the latest revelation and all of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, because the way, listen, when the past the PR note that Manfred put out to the owners, which obviously got leaked out there, the wording in that, if you read it, was we feel like we can get a better deal somewhere else with more with the declining distribution. So He took a shot at ESPN saying it's declining distribution. They want to pay us less. Somewhere out there, he's got to think, I have someone who's willing to pay me, $350, $450, $550. I don't think he's going to get those numbers, but keep this in mind. ESPN is going to need to pay for the highlights. They're going to need highlights for SportsCenter. How much do they have to pay for the highlights? So baseball could be saying, hey, if we get $350 from NBC or Netflix or Amazon Prime, we could charge on the back end the money to ESPN for use of our highlights. So they must feel like if they patch a couple, it's like a lot of people in this industry, TJ. We got multiple jobs I don't get paid a lot for this one. I don't get paid a lot for this one, but I don't get paid a lot. But if I put all three together, I can make a living, right?
Exactly. And maybe that is what MLB is trying to do. There's some speculation that they're going to enhance the MLB network and make that at least the part-time Sunday night, maybe for a package of like a month or a couple of months, that the MLB network will become the Sunday night game of the week home. I don't know that I buy that. They do a lot of original games of the week, their own broadcast. I don't know that that'll happen. Is Netflix, somebody like that, going to give them the $300 million a year to do Sunday night baseball and some playoffs?
I don't think so.
Stay tuned.
I don't think Netflix wants to get involved in baseball. I think baseball is not something they're interested in. We know Apple TV has the Friday nights. We know Roku has the Sundays. Is Amazon Prime want to get involved? They're going to have the basketball. I don't know that one of the streamers want to do baseball. It just hasn't worked. MLS isn't working on Apple. Quite frankly, I don't think the NBA is going to work on Prime either, but we'll see. I mean, I just don't think that there's a great fit for baseball. It feels like baseball and ESPN would be the perfect marriage, and now they're divorced.
How about that? By the way, speaking of other things that ESPN's focusing on, they're obviously ramping up the hockey. We talked a lot last week about the Four Nations broadcast, the Canadian-U.S. final getting, 9 million people to watch. And we wondered, Artie, is this going to translate into regular season NHL before the playoffs? All right, so interesting Saturday. They did the Stadium Series game with the Detroit Red Wings and the Columbus Blue Jackets game. Mike, I don't know if you saw a little of this. I honestly have to confess, I only saw a highlight or two. I was big into the college basketball on Saturday, and remember the Alabama-Tennessee last-second win by Tennessee on the three-point shot. That was the lead-in on ESPN. We don't have the numbers on that game, but the belief is that game probably got a couple of million people to watch. Well, with that lead-in onto ESPN, the Red Wings and Blue Jackets averaged 1.6 million people, making it the largest audience for the outdoor series in the last couple of years of doing this. Again, the novelty is kind of waned on the outdoor series, but the big thing is they were playing it in Ohio State's stadium. The Buckeye Stadium is where they were playing this in Columbus. See a little of it, and the number is a decent number. It's nowhere near what that Four Nations number is, not even close. But at least they had solid 1.5 million watching on ESPN for a Saturday late afternoon, evening Eastern and Central Time, at least, right?
Yeah, 1.6 for hockey is a pretty solid number for an NHL game. By the way, it's an NHL game with not two great markets. I mean, Detroit's a good hockey market, so yeah, you got that. But Columbus, not a big hockey market. I know they're pretty good, but still, if you're getting Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, or Chicago, Pittsburgh, or Chicago, Philadelphia, or the Rangers in Chicago, or you probably could bounce that number up to maybe 2 million, and that would be a pretty big number for hockey fans out there to get that kind of number. But 1.6, I'm actually kind of surprised by that. I don't know that that's because of the Four Nations carryover, maybe, but I'd be pretty surprised to see numbers like that stay consistent.
This is interesting. Matthew Tkachuk, the son of Keith Tkachuk, one of the two sons, Brady Tkachuk is the other one. Matthew Tkachuk was involved in the Four Nations. He was involved in one of those fights on the first game with Canada. He's one of the stars of the Florida Panthers, and he is now out for the remainder of the regular season with a groin injury that he suffered during that Four Nations Cup. So that's an interesting offshoot subplot that Tkachuk got hurt in that All-Star event, and now Mike Gill can't play for his team. For the Florida Panthers for the stretch run in the NHL. And again, the NHL games typically get around 1 million, 1.5 million. ABC has been running them during the day on weekends. We'll see if that number continues. They do well for the Stanley Cup playoffs, again, to get 4-5 million to watch. That's the range of the hockey audience. So that's a solid number on that. Few moments left. By the way, we have a sponsor on the program. That is Ticket Smarter and the Ticket Smarter mobile app. Let's tell you about them a little more. If you're looking to go to the biggest events in sports, we mentioned the Indy 500 or the Masters Golf Tournament, NCAA basketball tournament coming up, Major League Baseball opening day, Ticket Smarter mobile app. Utilize Ticket Smarter's technology. They have got the best prices on the secondary market through their algorithms. Your purchase is safe and secure through their mobile app. It takes you a couple of minutes to sign up and use the promo code LWOS20. Take $20 off an order of $300 or more. I mean, Mike, for the best seats on opening day baseball on the lower level, like behind home plate, you're not getting a pair of seats for under $300. The same thing for the NCAA basketball tournament in the lower level, headed to the Final Four in San Antonio. If you're trying to get into the Masters like we're talking about, use Ticket Smarter, the Ticket Smarter mobile app, and use that promo code. LWOS20 is the promo code from Ticket Smarter to take $20 off your order of $300 or more. If you're thinking tickets on the secondary market, sports, concerts, any kind of events, Ticket Smarter, the Ticket Smarter mobile app. Think smarter, Ticket Smarter, promo code LWOS20. Remaining couple of moments here on the pod. What else is on your mind? Broadcast news-wise, media-wise, ratings. Is there something else up for you here as we wind it down? We've covered kind of a cross-section of the different sports. MLB spring training going on. I know this is, we mentioned this about ESPN. This will be their final year of Sunday Night Baseball. The Sunday Night crew of Carl Ravitch, David Cohn, and Eduardo Perez worked a Monday afternoon Grapefruit League game out of the Florida spring training. And so they've started to ramp this up a little bit nationally now with the games that are coming at the end of the month. Anything else on that, Mike, or what else is up?
No, I mean, we're getting into March Madness. You mentioned Ticket Smarter. Get out to a March Madness game wherever you can. If there's a site near you, they're always awesome. It's a great environment to be a part of March Madness. In fact, I was listening to Jay Billis with Jimmy Traina last week, and he was talking about how he's been doing some NBA games and the difference. You know, he says he likes the NBA game better than the college game, but the college atmosphere unmatched. So it's one of the reasons where if you have a chance to go out and see a game right here in Atlantic City, we got the MAC, the Metro Atlantic. We saw Rick Pitino's last game at Iona. He was in Atlantic City there. A couple of years ago in Atlantic City, we saw St. Peter's as they started the Peacocks run to the Elite Eight. So you never know what you're going to see. If you went to the ACC tournament last year, you saw the start of NC State's unbelievable run. So if you're within a region where you can go to one of these games, get out there. So we're looking forward to I'm going to Atlantic City. I'll be at a bunch of those games.
Well, and by the way, St. John's has revitalized New York. The Garden is going to be insane, as it always is for the Big East tournament. How about if we get a 1-4 matchup at the Garden in a semifinal, St. John's and UConn in a Big East Friday night semifinal? You think that's going to be a tough ticket? Holy smokes. So you're right.
St. John's has beaten them twice this year.
Yes, and so St. John's out of New York, Duke out of the ACC tournament in Charlotte, Big Ten tournament Indianapolis, SEC tournament Nashville. It's going to be crazy with all the college basketball coverage coming up. By the way, the women's game also deserves props. They're headed into their conference tournaments this week. They start up their conference tournaments the week before, usually the men's tournaments. The SEC is the strongest conference with South Carolina, the defending champs, but you've got Juju Watkins and Southern Cal. They're in the Big Ten. You've got Paige Beckers and UConn, obviously in the Big East. A lot of women's subplots. The only thing I'm going to keep saying, it's interesting that all the women's ratings coverage has kind of gone silent. Nobody's talking about any of the women's numbers because all the numbers that Caitlin Clark and Iowa were putting up last year, I mean, we knew this. Common sense, it's not going to get touched. For example, a year ago on the first Sunday in March, Caitlin Clark was in the process of breaking the NCAA's all-time women's scoring record. So we get that that's a big event, Mike Gill. That game had 3.5 million people watching on average for women's basketball, had over 4.2 million people watching by the end of it when she broke the record. There's not a women's game this year that's gotten to 2 million people yet. Let's see if it will. Certainly in March with the NCAA tournament, it should build. I'm not saying no one's watching, but for all of this stuff that it wasn't one transcendent player driving it, of course, to that extent, it was her driving it. But that doesn't disrespect LSU and Kim Mulkey. That doesn't respect Dawn Staley in South Carolina. Notre Dame's had the number one team in the country for a lot of the year. There's a lot of fascinating subplots, but let's just settle down that the women's NCAA tournament's going to have 7, 8, 10 million people watching this year. It's just not realistic. Not realistic on that.
I was wondering how that was going to kind of grow. And look, the numbers have grown. I think the Unrivaled has done okay. Listen, you got a transcendent situation. Caitlin Clark's a lot like what Steph Curry did for the NBA. He came out of nowhere. No one said, this is the guy. He just became the guy who did something that nobody else could do, similar to her. No one said, this is the girl. She just kind of emerged as the girl. And you ride that wave. They're riding that wave. But men's college basketball, this is interesting because I got the numbers up on the screen here. CBS, 2 most watched games of college basketball, over 2 million. Last year, the conversation was in the men's tournament. The women's tournament rated better.
Yes. Certainly the Final Four. Yeah.
The final game, the women's game, had way more viewers than the men's championship.
Correct.
Does it go back the other way this year?
Likely,
and the men's tournament wins that.
So what you're showing is CBS had a Big Ten doubleheader that had Michigan State and Wisconsin as the lead-in to Illinois and Michigan, and they averaged around 2 million viewers, and that's standard right now. Now, Duke plays North Carolina Saturday night prime time. That's probably going to be a 3 million audience with Cooper Flagg and the hated rivalry. Cooper Flagg is obviously a transcendent player right now for Duke. But the men's college games have been getting around 2 or 3 million for their biggest broadcast before the tournament. The difference is the men's tournament will eventually get to 8, 10, 12 million people watching the biggest games. And then the Final Four usually around 15, 17, 20 million, depending. Let's see if it builds to that. But CBS, the home of the tournament, had a good weekend last weekend, and they're eventually building to the end of the regular season. So there's a little ratings talk for college hoops. Have we covered pretty much everything that we need to cover here on the latest edition of the Sports Media Pod? Mike Gill, anything else on the announcer front, the media news front, or are we pretty well good here for another edition?
I just want to give a quick shout out, Laura Rutledge. I had her on my show before she re-signed to go back and do NFL work with ESPN. She does some college football work. I think she's a really great reporter. She does a great job hosting the show as well. She just re-signed there with ESPN. You're starting to see a lot of these new, I don't know if anybody has noticed, but there's a lot of new faces and voices into the NBA world on ESPN. You're seeing Quentin Richardson. I saw Rudy Gay the other day. Didn't do very well, Rudy Gay. Needs a little bit more work. But you're starting to see them incorporate as, the playoff season is getting here.
Let's tell the truth. Some of them are auditioning for maybe an opportunity with NBC or Amazon and all the games that they're going to do down the road as well on ESPN and on other outlets right now. It's that time.
Yeah, that's why I bring that up, is because you're starting to see a lot of new faces. We did see, by the way, there was a lot of speculation about Dan Orlovsky. He was on Get Up the other day, so his contract, he had mentioned, hey, I'm going to be gone for a while. There was a lot of speculation. He was back on TV this week. So a lot of stuff on that note. As we mentioned, by the way, did you see the media story between the two insiders who got into a fight at Starbucks?
at the Combine. Jordan Schultz, the NFL insider for Fox Sports, for foxsports.com and on some of their cable shows, and Ian Rappaport, oh, by the way, at the NFL Network, got into it over Jordan Schultz's report that Matt Stafford was negotiating with the Raiders and Tom Brady at Tom Brady's Montana retreat. Ian Rappaport debunked that, and then they're shouting at each other at the local Starbucks in Indianapolis, right by the convention center. They're going at it at the hotel about whose reporting was right, and Stafford eventually stayed with the Rams. But yeah, media on media is always something juicy. Again, Jay Glazer is the more known Fox Sports insider. He wasn't reporting anything about Stafford and Brady, but it's interesting.
Glazer is not a day-to-day kind of guy. He just kind of pops up every once in a blue moon. You see him on TV.
I can tell you what his thing is, and he's admitted this, is he's not going to break news on Twitter. He has basically said, it is not my job to help the Twitter platform. He said, I'll break news on Fox and on their platforms and their TV.
Exactly.
That's what he's decided to do.
Jordan's been a guy who's just kind of been off on his own and kind of done some smaller outlets. And then, so he's trying to become a name in that world. Apparently his father is like the CEO of Starbucks or something. Like he comes from a pretty, that's what I've read.
Yeah,
so
interesting. Yeah. Interesting. But you never know what's going to go on at Starbucks.
Those kind of stories, the media on media crime is something that the listeners always like.
The arguing. And by the way, Schultz is a bigger guy, and Ian Rappaport is a little guy. If it comes to it. So there you go. A little media on this. We would never have an argument like that, you and I, at a Starbucks or anywhere else. We have too much love for each other.
I'm a pretty laid back guy. I'm pretty laid back when it comes to things, but I got a good hoot out of that. Like I can't imagine having the gall to walk. Like, listen, I get it. Maybe he felt like whatever, but couldn't you text him or talk to him outside? I mean,
I don't know. While you're waiting on your Frappuccino, I don't know.
Yeah.
By the way, we will mention once more, you and I will be together for the Metro Atlantic Conference Tournament coming up in Atlantic City. Stand by. That's not this weekend, but the following weekend. Live broadcast on TuneIn of the MAC, the MAAC Championship game. Smaller conference basketball. Can't wait for March, my friend. Looking forward to being around you in Atlantic City. I know you got to scoot. Anything else in closing, or are we good?
No, conference championships begin this week. A lot of the smaller mid-majors, they're playing. So the madness is underway. It's happening this weekend. You've got, your American East and your Ivies and all that stuff.
Missouri Valley Conference. Weekend. Yeah, Missouri Valley Conference, kind of those. Yeah, we love it.
Yep, they're going on now, and then the big boys start next week. So looking forward to it.
Should be a blast. Mike Gill, thank you again. Follow, subscribe. If you're hearing us on podcast, Apple, Spreaker, Spotify. If you're hearing us on the podcast, come see us. If you're seeing us on social media, including Mike's YouTube channel, the Mike Gill Show YouTube channel, go find the pod as well. We love all of the content. Mike, be well. We'll talk to you soon. That's the Last Word on Sports Media Podcast.